You're listening to a 58 Ember production.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girls Camp podcast. It is me, your host, Haley Rawl. And if you are navigating a faith deconstruction yourself or are simply fascinated by faith deconstructions, by Mormonism, religion generally, specifically where those things can go off the rails, then you are in the right place. Today's episode is about Mormon Youth Summer Camp. And it feels very timely as we are coming up on summer to finally be talking about this highly requested topic, which is EFY. EFY stands for Especially for Youth, and it's the Mormon way of doing a youth summer camp. We're going to be talking all about it. I will briefly explain what EFY is. I went to EFY myself, so I want to tell you a little bit about that, and then we will hop into all of your crazy story submissions about EFY. I actually spent this morning, I was out and about running errands, and I was trying to find the EFY theme song every year at EFY. I was under the impression there was a new album every year for EFY. I don't know if that's the case. I do know that my year at EFY, back when I went in 2009, I just figured that out because I was also looking on Facebook to see my own EFY photos, which I will share with you. And I went way back in 2009, which is kind of crazy to think about. But there's always a theme song for that summer, and there's usually an album. So there's like a handful of songs. And anyway, I was wanting to get into the right headspace for the EFY episode. So I was listening through some of the past EFY songs and theme songs. And I got to tell you, I didn't hate it as much as I thought I would. I did not hate listening to the EFY music as much as I thought I would. I feel like EFY is the closest Mormonism gets to the more evangelical brand of Christianity. EFY music, for example, is a welcome breath of fresh air compared to like Mormon hymns, because EFY music is much more in the vein of Christian worship music more generally. So it's more fun to listen to, and it's more entertaining and catchy than a lot of the music I think we're used to listening to as Mormons. And it's less somber. It's just, kind of in that Christian pop worship genre, which us Mormons, we didn't get a lot of that. And all of the songs were very Jesus-y and not as much in the Mormon way, which is really interesting to think about. All that to say, I had a good time listening. I couldn't find my '09 EFY theme song to see if I recognized it, so I'm going to keep searching for that. But I'm sure if you've been to EFY and you hear that EFY music, all those memories will just come flooding back, because I think the music was also a very intentional tool for some of the shenanigans that were going on at EFY, some of the techniques that were being employed at these summer youth camps. What is EFY generally? Like I said, Mormon summer youth camp. Back in the day, I think they recently updated it to be, free or at least really cheap. Back in the day, it was kind of expensive to go to EFY. And the typical EFY experience is you go to a BYU campus and you stay at the dorms as a teenager, and you do spiritual activities all week, spiritual lessons, activities, testimony meeting, dances, and it's all just kind of built around strengthening the testimonies of the youth. It's really fun and exciting because it's a sleepaway camp, which again, there's just not much of that in Mormonism. That's co-ed especially. So EFY is kind of where that happens. And it's really exciting because you're meeting up with youth from other states and other areas. So usually when you're doing Mormon stuff, you're just with your ward. But with EFY, you are going to EFY and people are going to be there maybe from California, maybe just from a different part of Utah. And as a teenager, that feels very exciting because you're expanding your pool. There's also some versions of EFY where you don't stay overnight, and I think they're cheaper and you just like go for the day. and do day activities and then go home, have dinner, go to sleep, and go back in the morning. There's also versions of EFY that were added later on that are like more adventurous. HEFY, I think it's called, where you go to other countries and do more service and also adventure stuff. But we're mainly just going to be focusing on true blue EFY on a college campus, probably BYU, taking the classes and experiencing kind of that version. One piece of context to mention about EFY too is that the counselors at EFY are almost always BYU students or Mormon young adults who are in the college age range. I think almost all of the counselors are in the college age range. So you have teenagers that are going to EFY, and then you have the counselors who are coordinating everything, and they are, in the 19 to probably 25 age range. So there's some dynamics that happen there that we are also going to discuss. I think EFY for a lot of Mormon youth felt like a really big deal and kind of a big piece of the puzzle of our Mormon upbringing. And even for a lot of people, testimonies were solidified at EFY and friendships were made and these bonds were made that really solidified the whole Mormon thing for many of us Mormon youth. One other thing I wanted to mention about EFY is that, again, I think they've made it much cheaper, if not free now, but it used to be this kind of weird elitist thing a little bit too, because it was quite expensive. I remember when I went to EFY, it was kind of a big deal. My mom figured out a way to pay for it because it's expensive to pay for. I think it's around a week that you go, maybe 5 days, probably more like 5 days. And I remember feeling really honored and really grateful that my mom found a way to pay for me to go. I also read a lot of submissions of people who said they never got to go to EFY because their families couldn't afford it and they always felt really jealous and left out. And I think that's an interesting piece of it, that they were charging so much in the first place, again, to Mormon families who were full-time tithe payers, so who had already paid their dues to Mormonism. And I also think it's interesting that now they've made it cheaper and or free. I think in one way that's good, that it's more accessible. There's not that elitist thing about it. But I also wonder why. I wonder if not enough youth were going. Obviously, if you make it free, that's going to make it a lot more appealing to a lot of people. So kind of interesting to think about that too. Okay, I want to dive into the stories, but there's one more thing I need to explain because probably 50% of the stories were about this one particular thing, which is called a cow. COW, crush of the week. The crush of the week is kind of the biggest deal for EFY. Even before you go to EFY, there's all this lore around going to EFY and meeting somebody, some dream boy in my case, that was going to sweep you off your feet, become your crush of the week, and you are going to have an opportunity to get to know them and dance with them at the last dance on the last day of the week. It was just like so much of EFY, to me at least, felt like it was built around this idea of finding your crush of the week. And all these teenagers are showing up with kind of this mentality of we're bringing our coolest clothes and we're going to look our best, and everyone's pretty much on the lookout for their crush of the week. So a lot of the stories had to do with the COW crush of the week. And we're going to read a few of those right now. Someone said, my crush of the week from EFY and I later met up in college and we ended up having sex, LOL. This may have unlocked a new sexual fantasy for maybe myself. No, not with my personal crush of the week, but kind of hot, right? To have this teenage crush at EFY and then get to actually have sex with them as an adult. That's kind of fun. Let me tell you about my crush of the week. I remember him very vividly. I should see if I can find him. I don't remember his last name. I remember his first name. His first name is Spencer. Spencer, if you're out there listening, DM me. Not because I want to have let me be so clear, not because I want to have sex with Spencer, but because it'd be funny if I could reconnect with this person back from 2009. My crush of the week was Spencer. I can remember what he looked like. He was hot shit at EFY. He was tall and blonde, and a lot of girls had eyes for him, and he was definitely kind of playing around with that. He was talking to a lot of girls. And I remember one day we went to a class together as part of EFY. You go to these classes, and we were sitting down in this class, and he came up and sat next to me, and I was so flattered. And he took my little EFY booklet, like you have little like planner type booklets, and he was like doodling on my booklet, which I thought was so crazy and flirty. And then he gave me my booklet back, and he had doodled a penis on my EFY booklet. Yep. He had doodled a penis on my EFY booklet. And the funny thing is, I think I remember thinking that was so scandalous and crazy, but it did not give me the ick for him. My 2009 self, unfortunately, did not get the ick that he had doodled a dick on my EFY planner. But that is what happened with my crush of the week. I don't think anything really panned out from there. I think I actually had 2 crushes of the week, and another crush of the week was a twin, and he had a twin sister, and he and his twin sister were like part of my group because they group you up, and his name was Parker. I think I actually follow his sister on Facebook, and he was super cute, but I think my friend I had gone to EFY with kind of had claim on him, but he was also blonde and cute, and we kind of became friends. But I didn't get a kiss at EFY. Nothing really materialized for me with the crush of the week. I went when I was pretty young. I was only 13, so I hadn't even kissed a boy yet. Had I? I don't think I'd kissed a boy yet. And so I was on the younger side of things because it spans from 13 all the way to 18, I believe, maybe 17. And so maybe I would have explored crushes of the week more later on, but I never went back to EFY. And I don't remember why. I don't remember like wanting to go, but I liked it when I did go. But anyway, I only ended up going that one single time. And so that is my only experience with a crush of the week. Okay, next submission. This is not my story, but my coworker told me that he lost his actual virginity at EFY. Him and his crush of the week snuck out Thursday night after testimony meeting and made out in her car and then had sex in the back seat. A life-changing week for him, for sure. Okay, so people, I guess, were actually having sex with their crushes of the week at EFY. And the thing is with EFY is it's yet again this Mormon thing where they're trying to do something co-ed that is so pure and so wholesome. And half of the week, of course, is spent talking about the law of chastity and really inundating young developing teenagers with messaging about purity culture and how ashamed they should be of any sexual desires and how they should never act on them. And yet you're getting teenage boys and teenage girls in the same place for a week. And this stuff is going to happen. It's just kind of funny and ironic to me that the church just can't control what teenagers are going to do. And if only there could be actual education about sex and encouragement for safe sex practices and emotionally safe sex practices. But alas, instead, they're breeding this culture where people sneak out and have sex with each other and then feel ashamed afterward. At the sleepaway camp at EFY, they are so strict about boy-girl interactions. So in order to sneak off and be able to hook up or even make out or anything, you would have to be pretty sneaky. The counselors, the EFY counselors, would sit outside your dorm. So you would be in your dorm with a few other girls. And I remember they would sit outside your dorm room until they were like positive that you had fallen asleep, and then they would be able to go back to sleep. They were really locked down because they didn't want people sneaking out. But of course, you could just like wait multiple hours and then go sneak out or whatever. I'm sure plenty of people were. And according to these stories, many people were sneaking out and making out and hooking up. But they definitely tried their damnedest to prevent that from happening. But again, only so much you can do. Okay, next story. 2 girls in my EFY session got into a physical fight over who got to claim one of the boys in our group as their crush of the week. 2 girls physically fighting over a crush of the week is kind of amazing to me. It's like giving dual energy. And I love that it's two girls fighting over the guy. I also wonder if the guy was just open to whoever won the physical altercation. Like, yeah, whoever beats the other one up, like, I'll take you as my crush of the week. I don't know how this all ensued, but that definitely checks out when you consider the intensity around crush of the week culture. I also feel like the crush of the week thing is funny because on one hand, there is all this purity culture messaging and, you know, be so careful with members of the opposite sex. And it's a huge deal to not kiss each other or whatever. But also there's a little bit of this underlying cultural understanding of crush of the week situations. And there feels like there's a little bit of an encouragement around it too, from like the counselors and just the culture of the whole thing. And just yet another example of a lot of mixed messaging. It was interesting to unpack this because part of me is like, oh, this is so fun that you get to go to this week-long thing and there's kind of this feeling in the air of like, go find your crush and explore a crush with another person. But I think the problem with this, really, in my eyes, is that when you're in a spiritual space like that, a really heightened spiritual space, it's not allowed in a lot of ways to just be like a fun, silly crush because you're in this spiritual environment where you're being taught to like prepare yourself for marriage and that you should only have sex with one person that you get married to. And it kind of puts like the weight of all of that onto having a crush for the week, if that makes sense. And that's where it gets really dicey for me, not to mention again, this is maybe the third time I've said this, but the mixed messaging of, yeah, there's a little bit of this encouragement to like go get a crush, but don't you dare think sexually about that person. Don't you dare kiss that person. And the whole thing just gets a little complicated. Moving on from crushes of the week to talk about something related, but much more problematic, which I got a little insight into when I went to EFY myself. I kind of remember some of these dynamics. But remember how you have these teenagers going to EFY, and then you have these counselors who were very recently teenagers themselves, who are in the, early 20s age range. And these counselors oftentimes are getting really close to the actual people going to EFY in some really scary ways. I was blown away at how many stories there were about creepy counselors. So let's read some of those. I went to EFY when I was 16 and I fell in love with the male counselor who was 23 years old. After both of us shamelessly flirted the entire week, he gave me his number on the last day before I went home. We ended up talking almost every day for a year and a half about various things, but mostly about going on dates when I went to college in Provo. Now that my prefrontal cortex is developed, I can see that for what it is: grooming. Yikes. In what world would a 23-year-old man give his number out to a 16-year-old girl? A Mormon world, I suppose. Can you believe this? 16-year-old girl and 23-year-old EFY counselor. He is flirting with her openly, asks her for her number, and then continues to communicate with her for over a year and a half. Absolutely wild. Absolutely wild that there are not many more precautions in place, many more, what word am I looking for? That there aren't just things in place to prevent that from happening, and that 23-year-old guys are getting hired that are hitting on 16-year-old girls, fully high school age girls, adult men. And there's this dynamic where there's flirting happening and communication beyond the flirting. So crazy. I remember at my session of EFY, another very vivid memory I have is there was a guy I went to high school with who was very popular. So I knew who he was, and he was in my same session of EFY, but he was much older than me. So we didn't really interact. I think there's you kind of are split up by age a little bit too. He was probably 17. I highly doubt he was 18. I think he was 17. And I remember that he was flirting so hard with an EFY counselor who would have had to have been 20. And at the last final dance, because there's a dance at the end of the week, I remember seeing them dance with each other. Like, he went to the EFY counselor, asked her to dance, and they danced with each other, and it was so flirty and crazy. why are they allowing that to be a thing? Like, it seems like the easiest rule to put in place would be, hey, don't flirt with the teenage EFY participants. That seems like a pretty easy rule to put in place for the EFY counselors, and also a pretty easy rule to enforce, especially when they are enforcing a lot of other less important rules than protecting literal children from the adult counselors. So that's really crazy. At the time, I don't remember thinking much of it because he seemed old to me, but even still, a 17-year-old boy should not be able to ask an older woman, who's the counselor, the person in charge, who's in charge of like making sure everyone's okay, to dance. And she said yes to him, and they just like danced in front of everyone. Really weird. There's a lot more stories like that where that one came from. Someone wrote in and said, I had a male EFY leader tell one of my friends that if I was older, he would, quote, do me. I was barely 15 years old. I spent the whole week trying to avoid him. Do you? That's very, very Mormon boy coded way of saying that they wanted to have sex with you. And that is so icky. Ew. And feeling like you had to avoid this, again, adult counselor that should have been there to like ensure you had a good experience because he told your friend, who also must have been young, that he wanted to have sex with you. That is so icky and so inappropriate. Okay, one more of those. The EFY counselor that was over the boys in my group, who was 20 years old and fresh off of his mission, pulled me aside on the last day and gave me his number, and he told me to call him when I turned 18. I was 15. Yeah, not going to hold on to your number for 3 years. You absolutely crazy return missionary. And why are you trying to seek out 15-year-old girls when you're 20 years old? At least you told her to wait until she's 18, but does not actually make it literally any better. This is so bad. So many stories of counselors hitting on the participants. Almost always the older men, return missionaries, hitting on young teenage girls. Bad. Very bad. Next story. I was so excited for my first EFY when I was 14. The Modesty rules were that the sleeve length had to be the width of 3 fingers below the shoulder blade. So weirdly specific, LOL. I went shopping for my EFY dance night outfit and was meticulous about measuring the sleeves with 3 fingers. I picked out a cute outfit that passed the test. At the dance night, an adult EFY counselor measured every girl's sleeves with her 3 fingers before she let them into the dance. Being an adult woman, her fingers were larger than mine, and she loudly shamed me in front of my whole group and made my roommate and my EFY counselor take me back to my room to change. All of my other outfits had sleeves with the same length as my immodest top, the normal cap sleeves so many of us Mormon girls grew up wearing. I cried and felt so much shame. My counselor found a long sleeve shirt from another counselor to match my skirt, and I felt so frumpy the whole night. Worst of all, my little 14-year-old spirit was crushed. The modesty shaming may have reached a new level when it comes to EFY. The arbitrariness of the 3-finger rule is such a perfect example of the arbitrariness. Is that a word? Why is that sounding weird? About how arbitrary those rules even are. And we've talked about this many times before on Girls Camp, but this just really highlighted for me how silly it is to make a rule like the 3-finger rule, which there are so many iterations of that in Mormonism, of trying to like police what girls are wearing. Because as this girl said, not everybody's 3 fingers are the same size, and it shouldn't even matter anyway. The fact that that was such a strict rule that they were literally checking with their own 3 fingers on this girl's shirt. It's just so silly and so sad, and so much time and energy wasted, and so much shame on young girls who just like wanted to go to EFY and have a good time. And we're trying to be modest. That's the thing, is like this girl wanted to keep the rules, went out of her way to do so, and still it wasn't enough. It's just so shitty. I got dress coded at EFY, and I don't remember at that age because I was 13. Maybe I was just so used to it. I don't even know. I don't remember feeling traumatized by it. I think already, even at that age, I was just like, this is how it goes. Like, you put on your shorts and you hope for the best. Like, you hope you get a lenient counselor or someone who doesn't care as much as the other person because I just was that used to having my clothing monitored. And I think I was sent back, like would show up in the morning wearing something and was sent back for it being too short or too tight or whatever. Let me read another one of these. That's so icky. At EFY, before leaving our dorm building, they would make all the girls line up in front of the boys and kneel down to make sure our shorts/skirts would touch the ground. Then they made us all stand up and stretch our arms up and bend over to make sure our shirts didn't show our stomachs. Then we would have to all sit there and wait for any of the girls that weren't modest enough to go change. They did no checks on the boys. It was mortifying and so unfair. Doing this anyway is absolutely absurd, but making the women, the young girls at this point, do that in front of the boys, adding that layer of shame of having them do it in front of their male peers who did not also have to subject themselves to that humiliation, and then send the girls back who didn't do it good enough. Not to mention just having to do that with your body, like put your arms up over your head. That's just uncomfortable to have to do in front of anybody watching you. That is so wild, and I can't believe that they got away with this shit. If anything, if they're doing like modesty checks, at the very fucking least, it should be in private because that's a super sensitive thing, especially for young developing girls. I can't believe that some people had to do this in front of the boys, and even having the EFY counselors have to do this after finding out about all those creepo counselors, and now they're making girls line up in front of them and do all these things to like check very carefully if they can see their stomachs or their knees. It's all incredibly gross and incredibly wrong. Okay, next submission. Before I left the church, I was an EFY counselor. And let me tell you, there is nothing more manipulative than Thursdays at EFY. On Thursday, everyone wears church clothes all day, goes to spiritual classes and activities, and then goes to a fireside and testimony meeting at night. It's all topped off with a very emotional group song that everyone sings while linking arms and swaying side to side. The goal of the day always felt like it was to get kids to be crying by the end of it, aka feeling the spirit. The small group testimony meetings in particular became very problematic. I started giving a disclaimer before them that testimonies were only supposed to be brief statements of faith, not confessions. Despite my efforts, the confessions inevitably started rolling in once one person started the trend. One kid would mention how before EFY he wasn't a good kid and how he was now touched by the Spirit and ready to change. And all of a sudden, all the kids would be up at the pulpit confessing their drug use, masturbation issues, criminal charges, etc. Several kids came out as gay in these meetings and vowed to stay true to the church despite their queerness. And every meeting, several very good Mormon kids who clearly felt left out would get up and confess not reading their scriptures enough or something comparable. I never knew whether to laugh or cry. The whole phenomenon was so ridiculous. So many poor teenagers were sent to this camp to fix them by getting them a testimony of the true church when really they just needed to feel validated and loved. Woof. Yeah, that is so true. I think a lot of Mormon parents probably used and continue to use EFY as this like remedial camp. Like, oh, my kid seems like they're not fully in on this Mormonism thing. Let's send them to EFY and hope that they get straightened out and hope that they get a testimony. And the whole point of EFY is to manufacture these experiences where kids feel like they need to trauma dump and they need to confess and then say that they're going to be better and that they've felt the Spirit and they get it now. And when your peers are doing that as a teenager, you're going to buy into that so much more, especially because, again, EFY is different than doing things with your ward because it's on this heightened level of you're meeting new people, you're caught up in the excitement of being around people that you've never met before, and everyone's trying to be cool and everyone's trying to keep up. And it just makes so much sense that that could spiral really quickly into people just getting caught up in all of it and making these sorts of confessions and feeling like that's what they needed to do to be accepted in that space. And not only accepted by their peers, but also that's what they're being explicitly told they need to do in order to be closer to God and to Jesus and to the gospel. And it all just feels gross looking back. The one thing I remember about my EFY testimony meeting, I remember that Thursday. It is the special spiritual day. Everyone talks about it, how spiritually impactful it is to do the testimony meeting with your group, and you've had time to get close to them and you've shared these spiritual experiences. My testimony meeting, the only thing I remember, I can't remember what set it off, but I remember someone went up to bear their testimony and I started to have like a laugh attack, like a giggle attack. And then my friends started to, because I was, and soon our whole row was trying not to laugh. Like everyone was giggling while this person was up bearing their testimony. And they must have said something to set it off that was kind of funny. And so we were all like stifling our laughter while this poor kid is bearing their soul, trying to bear their testimony. That's my one singular memory from my EFY testimony meeting, is having a laugh attack. I do not remember feeling the Spirit, nor do I remember confessing or the people around me confessing, but I can so see how that would be a very popular thing to do and to start happening. But I do remember there being that feeling of, okay, this is the time you're supposed to feel the Spirit really strongly, so you better feel the Spirit really strong, and you better get up there and talk about how much you know the church is true and how much better you're going to be because of it. I do remember that being the case. It's interesting to hear from the EFY counselor side of this, how, this person said there's this kind of unspoken metric of like, you want the kids to be crying at the end of the day. That's how you'll really know they felt the Spirit. And how people, the adults in the situation, kind of take that as like, ooh, like job here is done. All these kids are sobbing and trauma dumping. Luckily, this person sounds like they were a little ahead of it, but I do think that that's taken as a win on the organizational side of things. Okay, next story. I distinctly remember gathering in a circle after lights out at my session of EFY and giving the girls who hadn't had their first kiss yet a kiss. For some reason, we didn't think Jesus would care. Well, I don't think Jesus would care, and that sounds sweet and fun, and I hope it was a good experience for everyone involved. Again, just the experimentation that is bound to happen no matter what. When you get adolescents together, this kind of stuff's going to happen, whether the church wants to shut it down or not. Okay, next submission. This needs a little context, which is, when you went to EFY, there was this very bizarre, very outdated tradition where anytime you walked anywhere with your group, your little group that you were in, they made the boys escort the girls. So you would literally get matched up with a boy and you would, like Bridgerton, olden day style, hook arms and be escorted to wherever you were going. So when it was like lunchtime, you're sitting on the grass, you're doing your activity, and it was like, okay, time for lunch, they would pair you up so you could get escorted across campus. And if there was an uneven number of boys and girls, the boys would escort multiple girls, like on each arm. And you had to be escorted if you were walking anywhere with your group. Someone wrote in about this and said, escorting the girls at EFY from place to place, arm in arm, was very weird. I was an awkward and not so attractive 15-year-old boy, and it made me very anxious. In part because I remember feeling that the girls were very uncomfortable being forced into this level of physical contact and proximity with someone that they didn't know. Yeah, it was strange to be paired with someone, literally a stranger, and have to physically touch them in order to like walk from place to place. There were also a number of girls who wrote in and said that they were at EFY as teenagers. They didn't feel at their best for whatever reason. They didn't feel like the cutest girls there. And some of the groups, instead of pairing you to be escorted, it would be like boys would choose who they escorted. And these girls would get like chosen last, or the boys would act like so put out that they were escorting this person, and how damaging that was to those girls' self-esteem. It's just putting these boys in a very unnecessary position of power, of like, A, you even need to be escorted by a male figure, but also B, it feels like it's giving these boys like, okay, like step up, men, and escort these women across campus, keep them safe. It's like, what? were literally 16 years old. I also remember just being like a sweaty little teenager and just feeling like sweaty and sticky and uncomfy and having to get close up to a boy just to walk around. It's just so utterly unnecessary. I do think that they've stopped doing this, thank God, as well they should have. But I do think that that tradition was very alive and well for a long time during EFY. Okay, next submission. I went to EFY when I was 15 and I did not want to go. When I first got to EFY, I was so uncomfortable. I didn't know if the church was true and I felt like an outlier. I called my mom several times and asked her to take me home, to which she said no. By the end of the week, I was reading scriptures every day and crying at all the devotionals. By the end of EFY, I was all in on the church. To me now, this screams brainwashing. I look back and think how sad it was that by the end, I was obsessed with being the best in the church. But how did that change so quickly? I went from all out to all in 5 days, which is really scary. That was a crazy submission for me to read because obviously, you know, there's these tactics at play, and the whole point of this whole situation is to literally get kids to believe in the church more than they already do. But I was just thinking of being 15. This person was 15. If you're already questioning or you're already just like not vibing with it, and then you get thrown into this super intense situation where even if it's just for 5 days, you still are just pretty likely to assimilate and to just like start doing what you feel like you need to do to fit in and to do it right and to do it like your peers are doing it. And how crazy that 5-day experience for this person seems like it really changed a lot for them. Like they were potentially like, I'm not sure about this. And then after EFY, they felt like they were fully all in. And that's just a really powerful, really scary thing. Because it's not like it's inviting teenagers into a place to discover what they believe or discover how they feel about something. It's designed to get them all to be in the same place about the church, to conform to believing in the church and dedicating themselves to the church and doing all the things that the church tells them to do. And it works. I mean, it works. I think that it works really well, especially on young brains that are going to be a lot more easily affected by things like that. One of the things I remember from EFY is, I talked about this at the beginning, but all of the music. And I remember there was so much joint singing. Like they would have us all learn this song and we would stand up and like sing hymns together and sing these EFY songs. And you're in this room with like all these youth, all these people your age, and you would like stand up and sing these songs together. And that just felt so powerful because it's powerful to be with a large group of people all singing a song. And then you add in the fact that that song is about Jesus and about God. And I can still remember how powerful that felt and how I just connected that to like, this is the spirit and the church is true because this feels so powerful. When it just felt powerful because that's how it's going to feel when you're standing with your peers in a large group and you're all singing like a beautiful song. It's just going to feel that way no matter what. And when they're telling you that that feeling equates to church being true, et cetera, it works. I think it works really well. It would actually be fascinating to see behind the scenes into the planning and the organizing of something like EFY and how the people who are creating EFY, designing the curriculum and stuff, how they talk about it. And it's similar for missions and things like that. But I just don't know how you could be sitting down as an adult and be talking about, oh, let's do this so that these kids feel the spirit. Let's do this so that they learn the lifelong importance of reading their scriptures and not kind of realize how that is just manipulative to teenagers. And obviously they justify it because they think it's the best thing that they can do for a teenage kid. So they would never see it that way. But it would be fascinating to see the behind the scenes of that and how much they really are admitting to the kind of psychological manufacturing of these spiritual, quote, spiritual experiences. I don't know, just really crazy to think about that there's whole teams of people in the church that that's their job, is to be like, how can we get kids at EFY this summer to be lifelong members, to go on missions, and to never leave the church? Like, what are some fun activities we can do to that end? I also wanted to open up this prompt to anyone listening who's ex-religious, but not necessarily ex-Mormon. So didn't go to EFY, but maybe went to another similar summer camp. And someone wrote in and said, I'm an ex-evangelical, never Mormon. I came from a very traumatizing upbringing, and I was a perfect target for our youth leaders. They'd take us to camps for 6 days over the summer. No cell phones or cell service, just a bunch of high school kids and adults soaking up fun activities. They'd keep you up pretty late and have semi-early mornings. After a few days, you start to feel the Holy Spirit because you're isolated from the real world. At night, they do cabin times where people trauma dumped to the max and cried their eyes out. Then, one of the last nights, they talk about Jesus dying on the cross, and they give you an opportunity to give your life to Jesus. It's when you are the most tired, emotional, confused, and isolated that they ask you to make this decision. The whole thing is kind of predatory and fucked up. I cursed, kissed boys, and always stirred the drama, so at least I got something out of it. I cherish you and this podcast. Cheers. Cheers to you. I cherish you too. That was really interesting to read an ex-evangelical kind of equivalent to EFY. It kind of made me wonder, very much a side note, kind of made me wonder why they don't do EFY out in the woods, like why it's not more camp oriented, probably just logistical because they're doing it in such large numbers. So it's easier to do it like in dorms and stuff like that. But I think the outside camping element would add a whole different layer of that isolation. And yeah, I think this is just kind of the MO for these Western Christian religions to find ways to indoctrinate, especially youth, especially for youth. Ding, ding, ding. EFY. But yeah, interesting to hear that perspective from an evangelical summer youth camp. When I talked with Evelyn, her podcast is called Catholic School Dropout. She talked about really similar things in her Catholic upbringing, where they have the same sorts of activities and use these same techniques on youth specifically, and then get you to like pledge your life to this cause that you don't even fully understand and that you're doing under a set of circumstances where you're just particularly vulnerable. And I think EFY is one of those things too, like maybe Mormonism as a whole, but I think about, did I enjoy EFY? I mean, I was 13. I can't really remember it. I wasn't particularly traumatized by the whole thing. There was some weird stuff. That guy drew a penis in my pamphlet thing. And, you know, I don't really know, don't remember much more than that. But I don't think it's all bad, right? Like, I think there's a lot of benefits to joining with your peers as youth and being able to like socialize in that way, just like making memories and having fun. And there's a lot of fun elements of it. Some activities that aren't as spiritually focused that I think are just fun and harmless. But it's just unfortunate that all of that had to be done with this kind of underlying intention of all of that stuff. And anyway, whether you went to EFY or not, whether you liked it or not, there's the lowdown on EFY. Maybe it's all this EFY talk, but I feel like I want to trauma dump now, bear my testimony about something. I don't know. I was talking with Bentley last night, and I think that the podcast right now, doing Girls Camp, is so meaningful to me, and I love it so much, but I'm kind of in a weird phase where it's feeling really hard for maybe a lot of reasons, but I just feel more tender right now than I have in the past. And, you know, getting the hate comments or even people so kind and well-intentioned, but just disagreeing with me and taking it up with me in my DMs or in my comments, it's just felt really tiring and kind of hard. And I was talking to Bentley about this, and he was just so sweet. And he just said, Haley, you have to find a way to make this sustainable because you should keep doing this. And he said, you're really good at it. And I don't mean to bring this up to be like, my husband told me I'm really good at this. But I think I bring that up just to say it's really interesting because yeah, I don't know. Like, it's such a multifaceted thing to do. And I think sometimes we see other people doing things and it's just kind of hard to comprehend like all of the pieces that go into that. And all of that to say that I do really love doing this. And I also have a hard time doing it in a lot of ways, but it's well worth it because I get to connect with all of you. And yeah, now this is sounding cheesy and maybe like an EFY song, but I really mean that. It's really changed my life to be able to do this and to connect with people and to see you in real life and to talk to you on the internet. And I'm just really, really grateful. So if you're here and you're listening and you're supporting in any way, thank you for being here. I'm really grateful. And I'm so grateful that we get to talk every week. I have so much more in store and can't wait to keep doing it. If you do enjoy the podcast, please leave me a rating, a review, follow me on YouTube, on Instagram at Girls Camp Podcast, on TikTok at Haley Rawl. You can stay tuned for all of the going-ons on social media, and I can't wait to catch up with you next Wednesday. Talk soon. Bye.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
This has been a 58 Ember production. For more shows, please visit the 58 Ember channel, 58ember.com, or find us at 58 Ember Media on socials.